This is ACC Nation with Will Ogeman and Jim Quist, featuring ACC sports news and interviews. Available on streaming radio, podcast, and YouTube. Our special guest is the NCAA tournament bracketologist and analyst Jason Carmello, and you can find his latest thoughts on how teams might line up in March at big-underdog.com. Big-underdog.com, or follow him on Twitter at big_underdog_blog. And I'll tell you, if you're not, you're missing out on some really good stuff. Hey, glad to have you back, Jason.
Jim, Will, thank you guys so much for having me again.
It's great to see you. We've got a lot of fascinating stuff already starting. Yep. This season has started out well, we thought it was one thing. It's turned out to be another. And I'm sure by the time that the end of January rolls around, it'll be the same thing. So we're going to have you back either in January or February, and then probably right before March, just to see how things are just all coming together. So I want you to be prepared for that. All right, let's get into this. We've got some great matchups that are coming our way over the holidays. And of course, we're getting into conference play, full-blown conference play at the first of the year. So you've got out your latest projections. I was just going over that. The top seeds, UConn, Purdue, Kansas, and Houston. So let's just start with you giving us your thoughts on how the season has played out so far, and some thoughts on why those are the top seeds so far in your bracket.
Sure. UConn and Purdue have been fantastic, and they both are a bit of a surprise. They do it in different ways. So UConn, they're 12-0. Dan Hurley's a really good coach. They're in the top 10 in both offense and defensive efficiencies. They got wins over Oregon and Bama and Iowa State already. And what they really do is they guard. I mean, they really, really guard. Again, they're the third best defense in the country. Purdue's been a much different story. Zach Edey has been a really steady, good role player for the first 2 years of his career. Now, as a junior, he's averaging 22 points and 14 rebounds a game. So he has really stepped up. And what makes Purdue fascinating so far, they're 11-0. They have some really good wins, is they actually have a backcourt of both freshmen. And so what's interesting is, they've got Smith and Lawyer with a lot of veteran experience. And the thing with Purdue is it has translated in neutral court games and home games. And the interesting thing is going to be with two freshman backcourt players, how is that going to transition, like you said, in conference games on the road at Michigan State, at Ohio State, in the Big Ten. So they put a lot of hay in the barn so far, but their path is going to be a bit bumpy at times because of their inexperience at guards. And then Kansas is Kansas, right? They're small, but they're very athletic. Kevin McCullough came over from Texas Tech, which you rarely see that, right? A high-level major program transferring within the Big 12. He's come over. He averages 11 a game. Jalen Wilson's probably on pace to be the Big 12 Player of the Year. They're small. They're athletic. They create a ton of turnovers. And Bill Self's team, the scary thing with Kansas is Bill Self's team, usually they get better defensively throughout the year. They're already really good. So that's going to be an issue in the Big 12. And then Houston has kind of a different recipe than everybody else. Kelvin Sampson, he gets people and they stay for 3 or 4 years and they just get better and better and better. Marcus Sasser's been there, it seems like 15 years, only 4, but almost 15. They have consistently been a top 5 defense in the last, 5 or 6 years. They're number 2 again this year. They slow the tempo down. Now, the tricky part with Houston is, and you saw this a little against Alabama, they play at kind of their pace. They shoot a lot of jump shots. And so at times they can go cold. And so that's a little bit of a dangerous point. But because they guard much like Virginia, they're always in the game. So, right now, those are the top 4. Virginia is right behind, right? I mean, they're back to being – we kind of start talking about the ACC schools. Virginia is back to playing defense. They went through a stretch over the last handful of years where they just didn't guard at the level of which they typically do. And they also, their offense slipped a little bit. What's crazy is their 5 starters all average between 9 points and 11 points a game. Virginia. So everybody rolling out there is going to average about 10 points a game. So there's 50, a little bit from your bench, and they're going to win in the high 60s. That's kind of their recipe. Lost to Houston, that's no problem. But they already have wins over Baylor, Illinois, and Michigan, which will help them. So that's kind of the first tier, or those 5 schools. Bama's been really good too. They really shoot the ball, but if you watch some SEC games and some Bama games, what keep an eye on with them is where they struggle when they get against a team that's also athletic, they turn the ball over a lot. For a really good team, they are 319th in turnovers out of 363. So that's a lot of turnovers for Bama. So that could be an Achilles heel. A couple more teams in the top 10. Tennessee's the best defense in the country. They don't give up any threes. So when you play them, they will shut the water off on those, but they can't shoot the threes either. So again, a lot of these teams you'll notice, right, when you kind of look at the efficiencies, they're really defensive heavy because they're going to stay in all the games. The scary thing is, though, when they get against a team like in Arizona who can really score, what happens? Arizona's right now the second, a 2 seed, probably the last of the 2 seeds. They're big, they're balanced, and they don't turn the ball over. So those are kind of the 8. And then on the periphery, if you watch that CBS Classic, you saw UCLA, and UCLA, all they did last week was they went to Maryland and won, and then they really beat up on Kentucky at Madison Square Garden as well. They've got 3 players that have played, they played in the Final Four 2 years ago, that have played a lot of games. And so Mick Cronin always has his team ready to go too. So.
Okay, so let's move a little further down the line. Gonzaga is a team that's obviously been on the one line for a few years now. I'd say they're just a little bit down this year compared to the last couple of years. They've taken 3 losses already, but they've also had a ridiculous strength of schedule. So tell the people who don't follow them very much what's different about this team, and where do you see, can they eventually get back up to the top seed?
Good question, Will. Yeah, absolutely. So Gonzaga's guard play hasn't quite been as good as it has been in most years. If you look back at kind of draft picks, every other year they've been having a guard in that first round. And this year they're a little bit inexperienced at guard. They still have Timmy, who will be an All-American or first or second team All-American, but their guard play is coming along slowly. And so obviously like you said, Will, when you play those tough tests this early in the season, it can be a little bit bumpy. But then again, they went down to Alabama and they beat a really good team. They're guarding a little better this year, but their offense isn't quite as good. So they're kind of balancing it out. The West Coast Conference was very good last year. 4 bids last year is very good. This year, probably trending towards back to kind of the St. Mary's Gonzaga route, probably back towards 2. But the Zags are going to end up with a really good record. And that Alabama win is going to kind of solidify their resume. It was a little bit loose. And so now they can point to it and say, hey, we got better at the end of the non-con. We went to Alabama, got the win. And that's going to be a high quad one win for them.
Arkansas is a team also on the 3 line that you pointed this out. In order to have a real good shot at winning a championship, you have to be good on both offense and defense. And I'd say they are top 10 defense. Only loss is a neutral court loss to Creighton. I know they just lost one of their top players for the season. So what do you see in Arkansas this year?
Musselman's a really good coach. They've been really consistent the last 3 and 4 years. Like you said, Will, so when you look into to see, can a team make a Final Four, right? If you're evaluating, can your team make it? If you kind of navigate yourself to KenPom, they're fantastic efficiency metrics. And since 2001, only 5 teams have made a Final Four. So 5 out of 80 have made a Final Four with a defensive efficiency over 50. So if your team doesn't guard, and you're not making a Final Four. It's really quite simple. Mm-hmm. And just going back, and then we'll get to Arkansas in a minute, I think a lot of people last year, when the bracket opened up for a team like Purdue, right? Purdue had the second best offense in the country last year, and the bracket opened up. And all that stood in their way was St. Peter's. The problem with Purdue was their defense was 92. They didn't guard. And it didn't really matter who they played. They didn't guard. And it's just kind of how it works. If you don't guard, one of the 4 teams is going to get you on the way to the Final Four. Going back to Arkansas, they're really athletic. They're really talented. They got a couple pros on the roster. They've done a really good job with recruiting with the NIL. They've got some money and they've applied it, and they've really hit the transfers well. Musselman did it at Nevada very well. He's done it there. They're really skilled. Like you said, they lost one of their best players in an SEC that's going to be good. That environment there, he's got it back. Their home games are really intimidating. I think they're going to finish in the top 3 or 4 of the league. I think they're going to 3 might be a little high for them down the road because they're going to have to navigate some waters without some of their players. But I think there's no reason they couldn't be a 4 or 5 seed, right? And Musselman's shown the ability to win tournament games, whether it's in Nevada or Arkansas, to get to that Sweet 16, Elite 8, and eventually he's going to knock the door down and get in.
And I think the thing that is interesting is because we mentioned, between the defense and, they also have they're also one of the faster teams in the country too, that they're able to keep that together. But let me ask you about Kentucky. I'm staying in the SEC for a second. You currently have them on the 5 line, a team that just took a 10-point loss over the weekend to UCLA. And, a lot of, it feels like this team is they're just a step down from where you would expect them. So so tell us a little bit about the Wildcats.
Kentucky is a little bit, to me, at this stage of their season, like Carolina was last year. And they're just not shooting the ball well at all. And when you don't shoot the ball well, it just makes everything look hard, right? If you watch them play UCLA, it was painful the other day. It was painful to watch them play offense. But then you step back and you say, well, she plays the National Player of the Year last year. How are they not doing more? Again, their guard plays just okay. And so where is the offense going to come from? They've got a lot of freshmen. They got a lot of moving parts. They're going to have to really focus on getting Sheboy more touches. At times, they've seemed disinterested in getting him the ball inside. Listen, Carolina does the same thing with Baycott. They go stretches where they aren't disciplined with feeding the post. And when Kentucky does that and they rely on jump shots, which they did against UCLA, they're really going to struggle. I think they're going to find their level a little bit, right? They're not going to lose a lot of home games at Rupp. We know that. That means they're going to get some quality home wins. They're going to end up in the top, just like Arkansas. They're going to be in that top 3 or 4 of the SEC. And if you're in that category with some of those wins, if you sneak 1 or 2 out on the road, you'll be around that 5 seed. I think Kentucky has a higher ceiling than they're showing right now, because I think eventually they're going to start to shoot the ball a little bit better. Frederick and some of these guys are going to have to get going. I think they will.
Jason, I want to clarify 2 things with you. One, Kentucky and their play against UCLA, you said, it was painful to watch. I would beg to differ. I enjoyed it immensely. The second thing, let me go back and have you absolutely clarify this statement. You said a couple of minutes ago that defense wins games.
Yeah.
And for some reason that concept has eluded people who are, especially fans, who want to see big points up on the board. Yeah. But guarding your opponent will help you win games. So just for the sake of people who still haven't gotten it, please repeat that for us so that they get it through their thick skulls.
Right. I think, depending on the league and all those things, that you think offense scores, but when you look at the statistics, right, of the teams that are really good, they're absolutely teams that guard. And Virginia's Tony Bennett, that's what he does. That's his principle. It came from Wisconsin, right? The Wisconsin coaching tree. And his father, and he basically came to the ACC and said, there's no way that I'm going to be able to recruit like Carolina and Duke, right? Can't. And at the time, Florida State. And so what he said was, I'm just going to guard and I'm going to keep the game in the high 50s, low 60s. And at that point, in the last 4 minutes, it's a toss-up, right? Somebody's in foul trouble, make a couple shots. And then he just started building that, and he has just enough offensive skill to do it. And it's a recipe. Listen, Wisconsin's used it in the Big Ten a long time. Michigan State, to a certain degree, has used it as well. Houston, that's Kelvin Sampson. There's a lot of teams that do it, and very subtly, they'll never admit it, that's what Kansas does. Kansas really guards. And, they're kind of known for both and in Fog Allen, but really they're defensive based too. So.
Yeah, I didn't mean to put you on the spot there. This is just one of those bones of contention that I have because I grew up in the school of get up in their shorts
Yeah,
basketball,
absolutely.
and it works. It throws people off their game. And if they can't score, it puts you in a great position.
Absolutely. Jim, real quick to your point,
Yeah,
what's going to be
yeah.
really interesting is some of these coaches, the newer coaches, right? So Mark Adams at Texas Tech, my goodness, was Tech good defensively last year, right? They were a top 3 defense last year. And whether you can keep your players for 2 and 3 and 4 years when you ask them to play that hard defensively and you slow the tempo down. For example, Terrence Shannon was their best player last year, and he left. He went to Illinois. He's made Illinois very dynamic. Their second best player, Kevin McCullough, went to Kansas. And so you have a Texas Tech team that made the Big 12 championship, right? Was a 3 seed last year, had an amazing season, but their style of play didn't complement trying to make the NBA. And so you have to find a balancing act. Tony Bennett's been able to do it, and some schools have been able to do it, but can Mark Adams and some of these second wave coaches pull it off and be able to keep their talent? And is something that we'll have to see.
One of the reasons I don't watch the NBA much anymore. I like well-rounded play. Anyway, let's move on. Let's talk about something else before I just continue down this rabbit hole. Let's talk about the ACC here for a minute. You've got 4 teams listed in your brackets. You've got Virginia. You've got Duke. You have Virginia Tech and Miami. Talk to us about those 4 teams, where you have them seated, and what you think could be their future. And you also alluded a little bit a few moments ago to North Carolina and wanting to get into what's happening there. So this is the door. We're going to open the whole door here, and let's see what we've got.
Sure. Let's start with Carolina, right? So they're the returning, national runner-up. And so I think a lot of Carolina fans hit the panic button, right? They went to Portland. They really struggled. They're a little happy now after they win at Madison Square Garden. But if we back up just a little bit, 2 data points from last year to just everybody gets caught up in the moment that they made the national title game, but 2 data points from last year. In the CBS Classic last year, they lost to Kentucky 98-69. They got whooped. And then on February 16th, they lost a 195th ranked Pitt team at home. So on February 16th of last year, North Carolina had 0 wins over an NCAA tournament projected team. 0. Now they were 18-8, so they're probably going to get in that kind of like that 9, 10, 11 range, but it was still iffy at that time. So they had no good wins. They just lost at home to Pitt. And then somehow they started making shots. As crazy as it sounds, it was as simple as that. They started shooting the ball better. And after that, they beat a good Virginia Tech team. They went to Duke and won, which obviously Coach K's last game. They lost the second round of the ACC tournament, but then in the NCAA tournament, right, they worked that 8 seed. They beat Baylor, and they made it to the national championship game. And all this to say is, at times they're very undisciplined offensively, and they don't shoot the ball that well, and they get bored passing into Baycock. So when you start to add all these things up, absolutely they're going to struggle at times. But they have a lot of 5-star talent, and when they focus like they did the other day in the second half against Ohio State, they can beat anybody in the country. It's whether they're going to bring that focus. Of course, they're going to focus against Duke in the NCAA tournament game, but can they focus a little bit more to drive their seed into that 3 and 4 range to make it easier on themselves in March? So I'm not surprised by their slow start, because they absolutely could do the same thing again in March just because they're so talented. So I think Carolina, when it's all said and done, oh gosh, you'll play this clip down the road. I'm gonna say Carolina winds up somewhere around a 5 seed. Listen, they're gonna have some deficiencies with scoring at times, but they're gonna win a lot of games this year still. The Ohio State win will carry some water. We'll go around a 5 seed for them. Virginia, I don't see Virginia holding as a 1. I just don't think they're skilled enough offensively. I think Virginia will probably float towards that 3 and 4 seed, right? At the top of their line. They're probably a 3 or 4 seed. Duke's an interesting team. So Duke returned only 13% of their scoring from last year. That's a even for a Duke team, that's a tremendously low number. But their offense and defense is holding true, just like Carolina. Duke, I mean, if you watch some Duke games this year, they play hard and they guard, but they guard because of their length. They can't shoot three at all, right? Carolina and Duke's going to be a really interesting game, right? Because it's going to be a war on the boards. Duke is the number one offensive rebounding team in the country. Carolina's not far behind them. And so, listen, if you watch Duke, they throw the ball at the rim, they try to get it, put it in, and run back and play defense, which is an unusual thing to watch Duke this year, but it's working. Listen, I think Duke is probably going to end up. I think they're probably going to end up around a 4 seed. We'll just see how it's all said and done. You're in kind of that middle tier with the ACC because you have to keep in mind UConn and Kansas and Houston, those teams are going to stay in that 1-2 range. They're not going anywhere. They're already guarding and they're already locked in. Bama, these teams have a lot of quality wins. So the ACC is going to live in that 3 to 5 range. So that's kind of Virginia, Carolina, Duke. And then we look at the next set of teams. Virginia Tech is really steady. Mike Young's a very good coach. He's done a good job with that program. They played a slow pace. They don't turn the ball over, right? They're very methodical. They keep the score low. They're like a light version of Houston, right? They're kind of experienced and they're methodical. They just kind of do what they need to do. They're starting to stack up wins, right? They've got Penn State, North Carolina, and Dayton. That's pretty good. Penn State's actually, they're pretty good this year. A couple transfers. They got, Basil from White State. He's been helpful. And again, they just don't turn the ball over. I think Virginia Tech is actually the next wave. I've got them ahead of Miami. And Virginia Tech might live in that 6 to 7 range, which is pretty solid for them. Miami's going to have a ceiling, right? Miami's going to, I think they could only be in the 8-9 range because they don't guard. They're 123rd defensively. They really struggle with defense. And so they're going to be very limited in beating really good teams because even against a team like Duke and Carolina, who don't score the ball that well, they're not going to be able to get the stops they need down the stretch. So those are kind of the teams. So if you'd say, who's going to make the tournament? I'd go Virginia, North Carolina, Duke, Virginia Tech. Those teams are going to make the tournament, right? Miami is very likely going to make the tournament. Larinaga is a fantastic coach. They're going to score. They'll do enough, I think, to get in. And then you have the next wave, right? That's 5 teams I think are getting in. And it just seems like when you have 15 schools in an ACC, there's going to be a 6 and maybe a 7 getting in. So who are those extra teams? If you had to pick it today, you'd probably take Clemson and North Carolina State, right? You'd probably go there. Clemson's 9-3. They beat Penn State as well. Offensively, they're a little bit better, and they can really shoot the 3, which makes them dangerous. So because they can shoot from the perimeter, they're going to sneak up and beat. They'll probably beat Virginia this year, right? Because if they get hot and they get the game in the 70s, Virginia can't get there. So Clemson's going to be a dangerous team to follow. I'd say they're the 6th best team now, and then when you really start to research the ACC, it is crazy. NC State, Pitt, Syracuse, Wake, Notre Dame, and Georgia Tech. You bundle them all together. All of their offensive efficiencies are between 50 and 60. And all of their defensive efficiencies, except for Notre Dame, we'll get to in a second, is around 90. I mean, they're kind of okay offensively, and they struggle a bit defensively, and they haven't beaten anybody. The only team that has out of that stretch is Notre Dame. They beat Michigan State. But Notre Dame's defense is 223. They don't, again, that's almost double, right? That's even kind of double the metrics that Miami's running at. And I think I'd say the most disappointing team in the ACC is Notre Dame. They have 4 senior starters. They made the first 4 last year. And I think Mike Bray thought he was going to have a pretty good team this year. I think he knew that they would struggle a bit defensively, but there's no way he thought that they would struggle this bad defensively. There's not a great path. They're 7-4, so there's still a chance. But there's not a great path right now for them to make the tournament. Listen, when you lose to Georgia at home like they did yesterday, those are games you can't lose. And I know it's neutral and it's around the holidays, and that game will get lost. But in March, When the committee's scrubbing it and you lose to Georgia, no, that's not going to work. It's a lot like Wake went to Rutgers, and that's like a bubble game in December. And so the team that wins that game, that really helps your resume. Rutgers, beat Wake by about 25. So I think NC State is going to have a chance. They're 0-2 in the league as of now, but I think they'll get back to around even in the league. Clemson, NC State, then maybe one of those other schools. I think the bids are going to be around 6 or 7.
So you're saying Syracuse has a chance?
I don't listen. I don't want to eliminate anybody. In the middle of December, there's just so many. We're about a third of the way through. When you guys have reached out on when to join, I usually like to join about this time so there's data, right? So there's trends in data. Syracuse is 8-4, but it's a fairly hollow 8-4.
This is an inside joke, Jason.
Yeah.
I mean, this is every single year.
They live on the bubble.
Yeah,
it's like everyone has to beat each other. Somebody has to come out of that.
That's exactly right. Like one of these teams, you're exactly right, guys. Like, one of these teams is going to win 11 or 12 league games, and then they're going to go on the bubble. And if they win 2 games in the ACC tournament, they're going to get in as an 11 seed. And if Syracuse gets an 11 seed and a team that can't shoot against a 2-3 zone, then they're going to make the Sweet 16, right? So, a couple years ago, they made the Final Four when they should have made the tournament.
My head's going to explode.
Oh, no. I went down the dark road for you.
Yeah. So let's get a couple more in before our time is up here. And looking at some of the teams like around that 8-9 line, and I'm curious because you've talked about this team a couple of times in Penn State. Obviously, yeah. Micah Shrewsbury's done a really good job of elevating that program from just mediocrity. So what about Penn State makes them, what about Penn State do you like to have them in the bracket?
They're the most experienced team in the country. So they got a bunch of dudes, and they're not intimidated by environments, and they're really tough. Pat Chambers started there, and some of the players are from the Pat Chambers era, and they played darn well hard then. And like you said, Shrewsbury does a really good job here as well, coming over from Purdue. And they're not intimidated by environments. They went to Illinois, and watching that game, they were kind of hanging around, and they were up 5 or 10. You're like, okay, but Illinois is going to come back, right? Illinois is going to come back, and they'll win in Champaign. And I tell you what, Penn State just ran away with it. They're experienced, and their experienced guards are going to let them hang in there in the Big Ten. They're starting to stack up enough wins in the non-con that if they just hang around 500 in the Big Ten, they're probably going to get in. The Big Ten is going to be tough this year with a lot of good quality teams, maybe not a lot of great teams in the Big Ten, but a lot of solid teams, and Penn State's right there with it. So they're going to, as crazy as it sounds, what Penn State needs is help from their home environment. They play in the kind of the Bryce Joyce Center. It's very big, and they just don't have that home court advantage a lot of Big Ten schools have. And so when you go there on a Tuesday night, a couple thousand people, they just don't have the support. It's different than if you go to Purdue or go visit Izzo on the road. So if they can get the crowds and get a home court advantage, they're going to be really tough. Listen, we've seen that with Rutgers over the last few years, going to the rack. It's crazy, right? And, Steve Peichel has turned Rutgers into about every year they make the NCAA tournament the last 3 years. So they've got the environment built there. We'll see if Penn State can do it too.
So now that we're getting closer to league play, who are some of the teams from the one big leagues that we need to look out for as someone to look at come March as a potential Cinderella?
Yeah, this is a crazy one. I'm going to throw it out there. I'm going to go to the Horizon League. I'm going to go with Youngstown State. Youngstown State they've never made the NCAA tournament, and they've always been kind of in a league that's too tough for them. And the Horizon League has kind of gradually dissipated a little bit, right? Butler, about 15 years ago was in that league, and they've kind of gradually gotten to the point where it's a little bit more up for grabs every year. Wright State made it last year. Wright State had 2 or 3, key transfers go away. So Youngstown has some transfers coming in, and Dwayne Cohill is the best player in the league. He's a transfer from Dayton, and he's going to get about 20 to 25 every night. And they have the ability to really scare some teams because they can really score. So way off the radar in December, Youngstown State, as crazy as that sounds. Other teams that have been pretty skilled, listen, no one wants to hear it, but you're not going to want to play Patino. Iona's going to win the MAC, and they're going to be a handful to deal with down the road because they're going to guard, and he's going to have the X's and O's. So Iona, the Gales are going to be really good. And then one other school, the MAC, Kent State. Kent State went to Gonzaga, and again they've got some experienced players too. They went up at the Kennel and played Gonzaga, and they had the lead with 3 minutes to go. MAC schools typically fare well in the NCAA tournament. Ohio's had some Sweet 16s in the past, right? Akron and Kent State is the best of the MAC schools right now. The hard part is with those schools, sometimes, in the smaller conferences, the best teams don't win their tournament, and so they're not able to advance. But if Kent State can get in, I mean, they're going to be in that 12 range, in that 12-5 game, and that just screams upset.
For sure. I think didn't they play somebody else recently that they gave a scare to somebody else too besides
I think it was
Gonzaga.
Houston as well.
Yes, that's what it was. I think it was.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's definitely a team I would look for come March, Jim.
And if you're Kent State, you don't schedule Houston and Gonzaga on the road, right? Unless you know you got a good team.
Yeah.
Unless you think you've got an NCAA tournament team and you're gonna just get them ready for those 3 games in March of your conference tournament, and then you're gonna go get somebody in the tournament.
So Jason, we're already working on pulling out the clips of this particular show. just so we can come back in a month to 2 months and and replay them. And no, I wouldn't do that to you.
Well, I'll just pick different teams next time, and we'll just kind of keep stacking them. And by March, one of them will hit, right?
Yeah, there we go.
That's the way to do it. That's because that's what everybody on ESPN does. Why not? I'm going to burn and forever for that one. Oh gosh, our special guest has been Jason Carmello of BigUnderdog.com. That's big-underdog.com, where you're going to find the latest NCAA bracketology and analysis. And Jason, it's always a pleasure to have you on the program, talk to you about college basketball, what's going on. This is a good early look at what's coming down the pike. And man, we're going to have you back, like I said, as we get a little bit more into conference play and things start to the dust is never going to settle until the very end of the tournament, but along the way we'll start getting a clearer picture of what's going on. Thank you for coming and joining us this evening.
Thanks so much for having me, guys.
And real quickly, let's take a look at what's going on with the AP and coaches poll. The top 4 teams in the AP and the coaches poll: Purdue number 1, UConn 2, Houston 3, Kansas 4. When it comes down to number 5, that's Arizona. Then at number 6, it's Virginia. Duke comes in at number 14 in both polls. It's the difference between the AP and the coaches poll when it comes to Virginia Tech. The coaches have Virginia Tech at 20, while the writers have Virginia Tech at 21. And then Miami rounds up the ACC teams at number 22. In the receiving votes category, only one team there. At number 32 in the AP poll, it's North Carolina. Now, in the women's poll, in the AP, it's number 1, South Carolina, number 2, Stanford, number 3, Ohio State, number 4, Indiana, number 5, Notre Dame, number 6, North Carolina, number 7, NC State, and number 8, Virginia Tech. A couple of teams in the receiving votes category for the women's poll. At number 27, it's Virginia. At number 28, Louisville. Number 32, Duke. And let's take a look at what's going on with football bowls. One under our belt already on the 17th of December. It was Louisville over Cincinnati, 24-7. That's the Fenway Bowl. Coming up on the 23rd, it's the Gasparilla Bowl. That's Wake Forest versus Mizzou. 28, the Military Bowl, Duke, UCF. Also on the 28th, the Holiday Bowl, Oregon versus UNC. On the 29th, the Pinstripe Bowl, it's Minnesota versus Syracuse. On the 29th, Cheez-It Bowl, Florida State versus Oklahoma. On the 30th, got a couple of games there, more than a couple actually. Duke's Mayo Bowl, NC State versus Maryland. The Sun Bowl, UCLA versus Pitt. The Gator Bowl, South Carolina versus Notre Dame. And the last one, the Orange Bowl, Tennessee versus Clemson. Very ironic, both teams predominantly orange in color. That's a look at sports from the ACC. I'm Jim Quist, and for Will Ogenin, happy holidays to you and to everyone in your family. Be safe, drive carefully, and we'll see you in the new year.